Welcome to my instructions video for the boxy bag. To make the boxy bag, you'll need an open-ended zip. I really recommend that. Mine is just from the market, wasn't very expensive, but it makes your work easier later on, and it should be about 17 to 18 inches long. Then you need just the standard zip, and that should be 7 or 8 inches long. And I've also chosen some top stitching thread simply because it's thicker and it looks much nicer when you're stitching. I've also got a rectangular piece of fabric which will make the inner pocket, and that is about 14 inches long and 8 inches wide. You need 12 inches each of the upper part of the bag, the lower part, the lining, but also the interlining. And I'm using curtain lining again, which has got the insulation fused to it, which makes it really nice and thick and ideal for this bag. I also have some nice ribbon for the inside and for the little tabs so we can pull the zip shut easier. The original boxy bag is quite small, so I wanted to make it a little bit bigger to use it as a sewing bag. So if you want to do that, you need to follow my instructions. If not, just use Debbie's pattern as it is. I've opened it out by 2 centimeters through the center and I pin it on. Now you want to draw the lines up from all these little rectangles that come out and extend them by 2.5 centimeters, that is 1 inch. That gives your bag that lovely, slightly bigger shape. You also want to cut it out of the interlining, and then we do the top of the bag, and again I need to add 1 centimeter this time to the bag, and then I again draw the lines that come out, but this time I am not going to extend it as much because I want my bag to be a bit lower. I found that looks much nicer, so only 2 centimeters up, and extend these little flaps that come out and make the sides of your bag. And again we just go 2 centimeters up here, and that gives you the perfect shape. Don't forget to cut it open. It's not actually cut on the fold, you can see it here, and then also cut 2 in the interlining. You may want to put a few pins in to hold that in place. You don't need to sew all the way around. It makes it actually really stiff, that interlining, and it works very well. Now we're going to cut our lining. So put your top part of the bag on the lower bag, overlap here for 2 centimeters because that's going to be my seam allowance, and then just cut all the way around. And that's basically your lining already cut. It's nothing easier than that. Very simple. Now I'm attaching a ribbon across there. I'm also in a minute going to put my pocket in there, but first of all stitch that in. Next we're going to cut the handle, so just fold your fabric over. It's 22 or 23 inches long, and please make it 7 inches wide. My straps are just a little bit too wide, so 7 inches will be perfect, and they need to be 23 inches long. Then you iron them in half lengthways, iron them again towards the middle, do that on both sides. And then you simply fold them on top of each other and you iron again, and there's your handle all ready to go for top stitching. If you are making a lined handle, then of course you want to make it 3 3/4 inches wide, 2 pieces, and sew them again through the middle. Then you proceed as I've just shown you and take that lovely top stitching thread, which is much thicker than usual thread, and top stitch. Now you want to find a place on your presser foot that you feel comfortable with, that you can line the edge of the fabric up with. About 2 or 3 millimeters from the edge is perfect, and make sure the stitch length is quite wide as well. Now we're going to put in a pocket with a zip. place your material onto the outside of the lining fabric, and then you need to have a look at your zip. You need a centimetre rectangular long box, which you just draw with pencil, and a bit straighter than I was doing it here, please, but I was doing it upside down to the camera and I didn't actually notice. So a centimetre wide. Now check that the zip is actually longer than your little pocket. That's really important for making this easy. Now we're going to sew all the way around this with a really small stitch. Stitch length 1 is very good. Then you cut it open and you go all the way to the end. You stop about 7 millimeters off and cut into each one of the corners, right into the corners. Now you can turn the pocket to the inside of the bag and we are going to iron it into place. So a good way of doing that is to iron the seam allowances apart first and then iron down. And now you can make this look as if it was piped just by pushing the fabric up a little bit, and that gives you a really beautiful effect, as you can see here. And when that is really neatly pressed, you can put your zip underneath it. Now you can see that piping, that looks lovely. So what you want to do is pin this in, and then we're going to top stitch all the way around it. You could use the really thick thread, but I didn't do that here because actually I didn't have that thread yet at the time. But that would look really cool. So I've stitched that in now. Turn it over to the wrong side and simply lift up the rest of the pocket. Now you want to pin that in place all the way around, and then you guessed it, well, obviously we're going to sew it shut. And that's your pocket done, really. So it's not so difficult. In my courses, ladies are always surprised how easy that is. I can't believe they made that pocket. And finally, you want to just trim off the ends, just so you don't catch the extra bits in the side seam, because that would make it a little bit thick, so we don't want that. So trim it off. And there you go, pocket finished. Now we're going to sew the lining shut. So what we do for that is we fold it inwards, right side is facing each other, so the outer bits come over until they meet in the middle, and then you need to fold the seam allowance back because that's where the zip is going to go, and stitch across it. And you do the same on both sides, obviously. Now snip either side of those seam allowances which you've just folded back, and then iron the seam apart, and where the seam allowances face downwards, obviously you want them facing downwards because you don't want them to be visible when you put the zip in. Now we can do the corners. So you want to open them out, put them on top of each other, pin, and then we're going to simply sew across those. Again, my seam allowance here, I'm using 1 centimetre. If you use 1.5 centimetres, it just will make the bag a little bit smaller. And there you can see all 4 sides done. Off to the sewing machine, and because it's magic when you do a little movie like this, you can see it's already done. Fantastic. So, lining out of the way. Now I'm going to show you how to do a lined motif. That's really easy, just a bit of wadding, a lining fabric and the motif you want, and of course the fabrics have to be right sides facing each other, and then the wadding on top, and you can see the motif through here. So now we sew all the way around the motif, we don't leave a gap or anything, and you want to not exactly be on the motif, but maybe 1 or 2 millimeters to the side, so that the nice line that goes around the VW buses, which I'm using, actually is visible when you're finished. Now you've done that, you can simply cut around it so that you are VW buses are ready for turning. Now make sure that everywhere where you have a curve, you need to snip right to the seam so that you can easily turn these inside out. Then you pinch the back, cut into it, and turn your buses or whatever it is that you're using for your motif inside out. And when they're done, we're actually going to hand stitch them on, because top stitching would really ruin it a bit. So you need to have them facing towards the center of the bag, otherwise they'd be upside down. And I'm going to thread up a needle with a single thread, and we're now going to stitch coming from underneath through both fabrics, and we come out in the seam. So this is really important, otherwise you get like this scar look, which you don't want. Your stitching has to be totally invisible, so underneath it, come out just in the seam, and from the underneath this will look like a running stitch. Now I want to show you another trick. And this is how to create a lined applique which looks like it's been piped. So I've cut out two hearts. First of all, a red heart, and then a yellow heart which is slightly bigger than the red heart. Then I do a running stitch all the way around my heart. And once I've done that, I pin this heart, which is now shrunk down a little bit, onto the red heart. And then I stitch all the way around with a very small stitch of maybe one, like a buttonhole stitch. You can remove that running stitch now. Cut right back where you've got a dip or a curve so that it turns easy. Snip through the back and turn your heart inside out. And you can see here how beautiful that looks. And on one of my hearts I also put a ribbon on first before I sewed the two hearts together, and that's also really nice, I think. Then I position my hearts, this time they're facing outwards obviously because they're coming from the top, and I top stitch that all the way around with a thick thread. I don't go backwards and forwards, but instead I just pull my threads through to the other side and then knot them, and that way it looks like there's no beginning and no end, which I think is very nice. I mean, it's not necessary, you could just go backwards and forwards, but I think that looks really good. Now we're going to attach the handles. So you want to put the handles so that they are away from the side, because again you have the seam allowance of 1 centimeter, and then you take the other side of the top bag and you put that just on the opposite so that you get them in exactly the right position there. You could of course just have a handle which goes from side to side. It depends what you want to do. For that, maybe you want to have a look at the video which shows you what my students have done, and then you can see which one you like best. So now we're going to put the bag together, and one thing that's really important is that little tab that you can grab to undo your zip or do your zip up. So I'm just using some ribbon on either side, and that is on the shorter part of the bag, and the longer part of the bag on this particular one, it actually doesn't look like it, but the one you're making will look like that if you stick to the instructions. So you will pin this, and we're going to sew that across with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and that closes the longer side of the bag. You want to iron those seams apart, and to ensure that they really don't flop down, I'm using a zigzag stitch to go all the way from one end to the other, and I'm coming backwards on myself, grabbing a little bit of fabric in a crosswise fashion, and that will make sure that they can't go anywhere, those seam allowances. And then of course from the outside you want to top stitch the whole lot with that really lovely thick thread. Now we're going to install the zipper. This is much easier than you think. First of all, I'm using an open-ended zipper, which makes my life easier, I place it face down onto the outside of my fabric and I pin it. So you see me here placing the zipper against the edge, but you want to be a little bit lower, so place it about 5 millimeters below the edge, and that works actually better. But hey presto, I've done it like this. It still works, but if you want to do it perfectly, then go a little bit lower. Then you take the other side of your bag and you place it again on the other side of the zip, and you also pin that in. Once I have it pinned in, what I can do is open up my zipper and the whole bag is open, so that's fantastic to work with. Now I can go under the sewing machine and move my needle over to the left so I can get in closer to the zip. I line up the left side of my zipper foot with the teeth of my zip, and then I sew all the way down. And when you get all the way to the end, you want to put the needle down and then lift the presser foot and move the zipper up so that you can sew easily all the way to the end. Now I'm also going to top stitch from the outside, and I'm doing it with that super thick top stitching thread again, and you don't want to stitch too close to the edge. 3-4 millimeters to the side looks so much better than close. Also make sure the stitch length is really long again so that it doesn't look silly and pokey and small. So I would recommend 3.5 as a setting. Now you're going to close the side seam, and this is what the bag looks like at the moment. Turn it inside out, pin it across the end, and then sew it on both sides. Once we've done that, we're going to iron those seams apart and again snip so that the zip can face downwards, and you can also zigzag stitch those seam allowances into place, and then of course also top stitch. Now we put the sides of the bags together and make sure that you've got the upper and the lower part of the bag lined up. That's really quite important. And you also can see my zigzag stitching there. And you do that of course on all 4 sides, and you can see here now it stands up really lovely and you're almost finished. Finally, we can attach our lining. So basically leave the bag turned inside out and just push your lining bag over the top, turn it in, and then pin it all the way from side to side. The more tension you have on your lining, the easier it is to hand stitch now in. So thread yourself up a needle, and then we're going to basically tunnel through your lining fabric, picking up a tiny little bit of the zip and then going and tunneling through again, and that way you won't see a single stitch, which is really cool, I think. Also make sure that you don't veer upwards, but that you finish it on the same line. Take your stitching line as a guide, which is just hidden by this hand stitching. And there you go, you've finished your bag. You can be very, very proud of it. And on the inside you've got this fantastic zip which looks really professional, and you can put your purse in there and you've got your sewing bag. If you want to order this fantastic pattern, then all you need to do is go to either my website or Sew So Easy. The links are underneath this video. So thank you for watching and see you next time.